I'm quite different from both of the previous presenters. In a way similar to Rolf, that I was I am an architect by training, and I did practice architecture for about 8 years, and I still do it from time to time, generally, and I'm still looking forward to do it in the future. But I have kind of gradually transitioned also into the VFX industry. I'm doing a lot of ArchViz these days, but also doing some projects that are pure VFX and virtual production. These some of the latest projects. But I'm going to kind of showcase, let's say, first of all, let's say my very different approach to design and to kind of ideas than Rolf's. I don't get ideas out of nowhere as others do. I have to really inquire and ask a lot of questions before I can actually come up with any kind of visual answer. But and I'm going to show you here I have to change the screen. Shows on. Let's see if it will do it now. Okay, give me a second. Screen. Okay, so while I was at Bjarke Ingels Group, I was an architect there for 8 years, and I was a project leader for about 5 years. Project leaders kind of generally deal with the creative side of the project and managing the whole team. And let's say I did a lot of research projects, and my most, let's say, important project that I did there was the Mars Science City. So this was a completely different world. Like going to Mars, we have to come up with the architecture which is completely different. So as I said, we were coming up with a lot of questions and having to deal with a lot of questions on why we would want to do that and all that stuff. So the first question we answered was like in terms of technology and like the progression of humans in general. And we were talking about how, let's say, we first moved on Earth thanks to like the technology. We created fire first of all, and then weather and the climate kind of pushed us around a lot in general. So and then next aspect was that we were, let's say, during the Roman Empire, in 3 months we were able to travel maybe from Spain to Turkey. Then 500 years later, we were able to, 500 years ago, we were able maybe to traverse an ocean. And then now we're getting faster and faster to the point that we can get to the moon in a couple of days. It took like the Apollo 11 mission took like 8 days and 3 hours. And then we imagine that in the future, probably the same way that traversing an ocean used to be, it will be to go to Mars. So we kind of draw that comparison. And then also getting to what we hope that in the distant future, we're also going to be able to reach other galaxies and other stars. But the next thing we had to ask ourselves is like, what is important when we go on Mars? That's one of the first things that, let's say, as a designer, you have to, let's say, communicate what are the most important things that you have to deal with. And one of the more important things was the ecosystem that you're going to live in, because Mars is not a habitable place. So we kind of tried to make the comparison of what do we have here on Earth as a normal human being, and what can we offer, realistically speaking, off-world. And the size constraint will be quite a lot. And one of the things that we have to bring is, of course, food and air, and create air, breathable air. And that's where our symbiosis with plants was kind of a really, really big realization, that we cannot live without plants, and we have to somehow create this very harmonious environment. So we looked at the, let's say, the ecosystem of needs for humans and the ecosystem of needs for plants. And we tried to look at the commonalities, and we imagine the whole system, how it would work, and how this would everything would feed and loop back to each other. And then we imagined how every material would be created and how we would use water for everything, and like how we would make bricks and glass and all that stuff. And we realized that we can actually, using the resources that are available on Mars, create a full life for people. There's this kind of paradigm where it somehow feels that when you're living on another planet, you're almost like going to prison. You're going to live in a very restrained environment somehow. Then we were imagining the stages of going to Mars and how it is to the first time when you land there, and then how you bring things there, and then how in the future we'll be able to live there without needing any support from Earth. And then we realized that, you know, Mars is still quite closed compared to other planets, especially like you generally see this visualization of space, and you think things are quite close, but actually Mars is fairly close to Earth, especially compared to like the next closest planet, which is Jupiter going out, and then Venus is also quite close. And to Mars, we think we could get into like 6 months or 3 months, but to Jupiter it would take like 2 years, so it's already kind of out of the question. And then we compared, let's say, all like the physical properties that we need to live, let's say like gravity, air pressure, temperature, wind speed, and all of these things. And then we kind of generally feel that Mars kind of has a lot of good checkboxes for us in order to live there. Venus, one of the biggest problems is like the second candidate is like the super high pressure atmosphere. So we're gonna have to live in the clouds, which is a very different experience compared to the one we have on Earth. So it would be very unfamiliar, let's say. It would be something quite new in general. Then let's say we looked at like the day cycles, and we thought about the whole human experience and what it means to experience a year, to experience a day. We realized that actually, let's say, the land surface on Earth and Mars is actually comparable since there's no water on it, that the seasons and the daily hour are fairly similar. And also the atmosphere is almost like inverted. Let's say here on Earth you have the blue sky, and on Mars you have the red sky, but actually at sunset they get reversed, so you get blue sunsets on Mars. And then we looked at the whole history of human exploration on Mars and all the images that were brought back from there. And yeah, it looked like a very fascinating and alien world in some ways when you look at it from above, but somehow when you look at it from let's say person perspective, then it looks a bit more familiar in some ways, surprisingly. Then we looked at all the problems that we had to solve in general. We looked at where you could go. We looked at all, let's say, what NASA has been looking at, what can you bring there, and in general, the consensus is that you should be able to live off the land, otherwise it's never going to be a place you can really go to and live there long term. And we looked at, let's say, people living in extreme environments like Tunisia, where like it seems like there's nothing here, but actually there's a lot of houses which are kind of carved into the ground. We looked at, let's say, the canyons in Arizona, where the houses are also kind of hidden in the escarpment of the cliff, hidden from shade. Then we looked, because it's very cold there, at like how the Eskimos live, and also at their very interesting tricks that they're using to keep temperature inside of the igloo, and how to ensure passage inside and not the heat not going out, and all, let's say, the vernacular that has been created here on Earth. And then we looked at what could be the ingredients for a Martian vernacular. And so we looked at pressure domes because we needed to create an atmosphere. We looked at 3D printing because we wanted to use local resources. We looked at carving into the rock because of the forces we had to deal with, and the radiation especially. So we took, let's say, we modernized all the old knowledge and created, let's say, modern versions of them, and how can we use them in order to, let's say, give proper life to on Mars. We looked at what it means for structures, the fact that you can jump much higher. What does it mean? Maybe then you don't need stairs, you can just jump from one floor to another. You don't need columns because generally the force of the pressure that you have to create inside is much stronger than gravity. And then the fact that humans are able to live at actually lower pressures than we are, let's say, used to here on Earth. You can live at like half the pressure that we have at sea level. And then there was an experiment in Skylab that the Americans did, where you could actually live at a third of the atmospheric pressure that we normally have on Earth. And we looked also at radiation, looking that it sounds like a super huge problem, but actually what we can imagine a scenario where you get similar radiation dose to airline crew. And we realized that most people actually spend only like about 2 hours, let's say, outside on a regular basis. So if you're going, let's say, outside of the habitat for 2 hours, then you should get a similar dose of radiation to airplane pilots. Then we looked at construction methods, let's say, use the fact that 3D printing can actually inform the whole procedure. We looked at what are the most efficient geometries in general, and how that can create, let's say, a vernacular in general. We imagined how we could construct it, and in generally, one of the big decisions we made was that we want you to have, let's say, very normal experience. You have to be kind of connected to the outside. You have to be able to see outside. We don't imagine this world where you're looking out, let's say, very small window or at screens to look outside, because studies have said that you get depressed otherwise. And we wanted you to have a very good connection with all the plants that you bring with you, because if they die, you die. Basically, it takes 6 months or 3 months to bring anything from Earth, so you will die in the process of them shipping you some new food. So we made a hybrid that kind of was able to solve all the problems by digging into the ground using 3D printables and creating this dome on top, which create different levels of sheltering in general. And we are also using maybe sometimes the craters to create the shapes. If you don't have a very solid rock, then you have to create a sphere. You are obligated by the laws of pressure. By understanding these physical forces, you are obligated to make sphere, if you actually do have a solid bedrock, then you can actually anchor this dome into the ground. And then we looked at, let's say, redundancy, and what we arrived at is the fact that you can create almost like a fire scenario, where you have each dome very separate, and then you have this kind of buffer zones that are very fireproof in between. So any one of the domes can fail, and it's not a problem. But the problem is that you can realistically build these things up to a certain size. Afterwards, the space efficiency versus material used is not great. So then we looked at toruses, which became a much more efficient ways of building, and then connecting them into like these large surfaces, kind of amoeba, to house like very, very big populations. And this was kind of a staging of the whole project. And we even proposed, let's say, a Earth simulation version where like it would be built the same way as space, and then it could be like a simulation city for all of this. And then because of 3D printing, the buildings would look like this. You would see you could take shelter underground, but you would still have, let's say, this kind of pool that would shelter you from radiation, but you would still be able to see outside and kind of feel connected to everything. Even though you're underground, you shouldn't feel like you're in, let's say, like really big trouble. And then always kind of feel connected to plants in general. You feel like it's a nice environment in general, so that you don't feel that you're, say, in a very sterile environment. Yes, and after this, this whole adventure, I was involved in creating, like, let's say, the first AI for the office, with first attempt at creating AI for architecture. And in that process, I analyzed, let's say, a lot of the creative flow that we do in the projects in an architecture office. And I looked weekly on what is happening every day. And I made, let's say, this kind of flow charts, which in a way look a bit like the squiggly mess that was shown in the previous presentation, because there's so many parallel things that happen all the time. And then there's always this train of research that is kind of informing design decisions during the whole design stages. And you can see, like, as research evolves, also the design evolves quite a lot. Yes, and so that was, and then let's say the AI was able to, let's say, look at a site. Unfortunately, I cannot show you the working prototype. We had it in an exhibition in the Danish Architecture Center, but it would look at the site, and it would show you all of the, let's say, properties of the site, and then you could analyze. It could analyze the program. There was 2 students from the IT university who created, let's say, software that would analyze program and the relationships between the program, and it would create different, let's say, compositions. Then, let's say, I analyzed all of the typologies that the office was using, so that it could, I could give, let's say, the user, let's say, the options that they could start with, and they could see. This was how that, let's say, starting from different shapes, how the program would be put into it. The views, like the potential views, would be analyzed. The shadows were generated. We at Big had a whole team of parametric engineers who created all of these algorithms that would analyze shadows, the sun intake, and then the relationship matrix was generated by the AI inside of this shape, and then it would kind of create different grades for it, and then in the end it would give like a efficiency score regarding like how well the structure is, the materials that were used, and all of these things. But in that process, I was always quite excited about parametric architecture. So I got into a lot of software like Unreal and Houdini and Grasshopper. So I was more and more curious about this, let's say more, let's say software-based exploration. And you always see that, let's say the software that people use kind of, especially in architecture, because architects are not necessarily the most, let's say, good in like proficient in using, let's say, the modeling software. The software kind of tends to influence how the buildings look. And you can see like a lot of modern architecture is influenced by Rhino, which is the leading software. But I was also quite interested in like how other softwares could influence architecture. So at the end of the day, I left the company, and I was in love with Unreal, so I joined a team that was doing a lot of Unreal work. And this is, let's say, a reel of projects that have happened since then. This is a collaboration with C3, and Andreea and Anca actually worked on some of these projects. And then there are some which are collaborations with VFX House from Tokyo, Kaki Studios, and Studio Set from Romania. And you will see here like a mix of different projects. This is an opera in Shenzhen that we did together. This is Hyperloop simulation that was featured on their social media, showing how we could travel in the future in different cities. For this project, we did a lot of plot simulations, especially, and then we also generated a lot of assets for the city. And as I'm going to show you, we've done a lot of storytelling for, let's say, sustainability projects. And we've kind of, let's say, one of the main takeaways I think that I've learned from my architecture background is how to ask questions and how to tell stories in general. And I think telling stories has been one of the, let's say, our biggest, let's say, advantages when collaborating with architects, because a lot of times they have to communicate very complex ideas that seem almost unapproachable, and we have to kind of tell them in a very coherent story. I'm going to show you a little bit what that means. This was Bjarke's presentation at in Milan for like what's it called, an environmental study. We did all of the story. We had to make sure that everything makes sense. All the shots, there's almost 100 shots that have to come together, and they have to form a very coherent story. And so we had to plan the whole production of all of these images, and it's trying to explain global warming in general. It's trying to show you very visually, let's say, how much CO2 we use in general. and then try to show who are the biggest, let's say, emitters of now and in the future, in the past and in the future. Then we were showing, let's say, how it's actually, let's say, all the industries, how much they, let's say, contribute to global warming. And also very visually show like which are kind of the biggest problem. So energy is our biggest problem. Transportation is surprisingly not as big, and the waste, let's say, they don't contribute that much. Food is, let's say, the third problem that we can deal with, and then these, as we'll see, we can tackle in different ways. And this was, let's say, trying to kind of make people understand what they can do on a single person scale, and then at 1 million, and then 10 billion people, and then at the scale of the planet, let's say, try to understand what resources and what, let's say, problems we have when we talk about one person at a planetary scale and their impact. And then this shows you like how much land there is available for each person. But actually from that land, 50% of it is actually given to nature. And then basically for all the human needs, we use about 72 by 72 meters. And half of that land is actually agricultural land, which is was maybe quite surprising to me. And then we divided into like each type of land, how much CO2 they emit, and then let's say the urban part, the buildings, the transportation, the industry, the big man-made objects on Earth, their contributions to global warming, and then of course the energy, the division of energy. And then we tried from here on, we tried to show alternatives. Let's say if we go back, going from oil to like only solar and wind, this would be the surfaces that would actually be needed to solve for only one person. So every person needs about 66 square meters of solar energy, and about 173 square meters of water, or let's say area for wind turbines. And of course, that's not a very simple story, because there's people who use countries, let's say, that use less energy, and other countries that use more energy. So we imagine that everybody, let's say if Denmark is considered one of the happiest countries on Earth, then we want everybody to have access to the same level of energy consumption that is in Denmark. And then we looked at, let's say hydrogen, also as a source for fuel, and how, let's say, actually how big the problem is actually batteries, and to kind of ship things around. But the batteries can actually be, let's say, replaced by, by hydrogen fuel, which is actually much more space efficient than batteries. Then we would also like to decarbonize the whole industrial process, and also minimize waste. This is the amount of waste that every person produces on Earth. And then what the architects were proposing was to kind of switch that into biomethane, and like use that for create different other products that are useful for humans. And then there's other problems like let's say the fact that generally there's a lot of burning of crops, and that produces a lot of nitrous oxide. And instead of doing that, you can repurpose the land for other things that would offset that carbon footprint, and then you can let's say offset the impact of let's say raising cows by planting more trees and having cows let's say graze in a forest instead of in an empty land. So yeah, I'm gonna cut the story short, but generally this shows that by using all of these strategies, you can actually reduce the whole footprint, the whole carbon footprint of everybody, and how much land everybody needs to survive on Earth, to about let's say 10% of what was used until now. Comparably, and then this would show like how much land is needed for a country like Denmark, like a country like US, and for the whole world. So this kind of shows that the problem is solvable, and this was like a presentation that was supposed to be made in like 10 minutes, like 10-20 minutes, so you could understand this very complex topic in a very visual way, very fast, and not only see the problems but also the solutions and understand, let's say, the scale of this problem generally. And then we also did a lot of animation showing how this can be solved more at the, let's say, our level where we are more familiar with, at the, let's say, urban level, and at the city level. Yeah, but I think I have to cut this a bit short. We were showing here like a lot of data to kind of try to really convince that this thing is very doable if the whole planet kind of gets together and creates like a massive electricity grid in order to help let's say compensate for all the demands of Earth. Then let's say while we were doing this very conceptual thing, we got asked to do let's say another story for the same architects, and this was this story about a new type of port in Aqaba. This was done using a Blender, and we used Blender because it allowed us to iterate quite quickly, and then it's much more efficient for animation and for parametric placement of objects, and you can use GPU rendering quite efficiently as compared to, let's say, V-Ray and other software. And here again we were explaining let's say how this whole port will be built up piece by piece, and then how the whole phasing happen, that everything would have solar panels on top of it. There will be like a whole community center built around it. There will be some buildings on water, and then all of these buildings would support the creation of a big green infrastructure in general. Yes, and then one thing I wanted to show you, my passion for Unreal has been growing a lot, and I've been doing a lot of these kind of like tame projects in some way. Since I left Bjarke Ingels, I haven't been working on Martian projects anymore, but I've been working with students from Design Morphine, which are training themselves to become VFX artists, and they have to do a process where they are showing, let's say, a whole a completely new world, how it's getting built up. And they have to imagine it from the character perspective, like they imagine a new character, a new, let's say, type of person that has special needs in a special world. Some of them did projects in the water, as you can see here, and then their characters are uniquely adapted to working in water. And I personally come at the stage, let's say, where they need to put this whole story together and help them learn Unreal and how Unreal is an amazing storytelling tool in general. And I teach them a lot about camera motion, storytelling, in general, how to tell a clear story, how to use all of the tools in Unreal to go, let's say, to skin their characters, to make simple camera animations, how to really fast bring these assets into their world, create all the materials, all the animations, and create a coherent storyline in general. And this is done all over the course of a 2-week workshop where a lot of them don't know anything about Unreal, and this is their result after 2 weeks of work. I'm gonna let you enjoy a little bit more their work. I think it's been quite a nice showing, refreshing, let's say, experience, where you can see very different approaches on life and what it means, and very different worlds. You can see that, let's say, 20 different people imagine 20 different types of worlds. And they over the course of the Design Morphine masterclass, they get to learn how to put that in a in a visual way, how to communicate that in a visual way. And then here we get to, like, let's say, the kind of crazier worlds that are maybe much less, let's say, similar to what we know here on Earth. And then there was even one project that was completely space-based. And this project was done, for example, modeled completely in Rhino with Grasshopper, and then brought into Unreal for visualization. Okay, but I think I am out of time. I'm not gonna keep you much longer. If you have, unfortunately, I cannot show you. I didn't get approval to show you the virtual production project. So I'm really sorry for that. But yeah, now we can open it up for questions. And by the way, we are looking for collaborators. So this is our website. You can write us here if you want to work with us.
Alrighty. Well, Thanks a lot for this very impressive display of different different fields, going from architecture to kind of scientific visualizations to even student work, building up entire entire 3D worlds. Let's check if there are a couple of questions coming in from the audience. So I see there's a comment that you guys have been geeking out on the scientific research. I think that comment was made when you were talking about the research for the Mars location. And I'm curious for that project, what was the inspiration to do that project? Was this specifically for a client, or
Yes, it was a client which actually wanted us to take a completely fresh look at what it means to build on a different planet, because they were kind of unsatisfied. It was the UAE government actually, and what they say is that, you know, they're and I wouldn't I mean, I'm not speaking for them, but they say that they basically have uninhabitable, let's say by normal standards, environment, but they want to be able to be kind of part of the world. They want to be an attractive part of the world, in the same way that, let's say, a different planet is also kind of unattractive. Like right now, if you want to go on Mars, you can't survive there. It's not gonna be, you can't go to the beach and hang out there. There's no parties, there's nothing. So they wanted to create a vision which can look attractive for people, that people actually want to go there. And it's also quite scientific, and they wanted to inject this kind of energy of positivity. And if it can, and one of the lessons that we had was that if we can do this for Mars, we can do it for Earth. And actually we made this presentation for the World Government Summit, and we realized that let's say all the problems that we have to solve for Mars are actually problems that we also have to solve here on Earth. But usually what happens is that technology which you generate for space happens much quicker because you have a lot of funding, and you don't think, okay, if you need to scale this technology, it has to be so cost effective and everything. You just use the best technology you can. And basically, if we take the let's say the UN sustainable goals, you see that let's say we need to reduce the amount of land that we use per person for agriculture, and that's exactly what we need to do for Mars. On Earth, we have a lot of water. On Mars, we have very little water, so our water consumption needs to go down quite a lot. Then we need to use fully renewable power, and on Mars, we cannot burn anything, so we really need to use only sustainable energy. We cannot throw away because everything, anything, because we cannot bring it from Earth. It's just extremely expensive to bring it, so we have to reuse everything. We have to invent new systems of locomotion, and we have the chance to kind of start it from scratch. And let's say the ecosystems here on Earth is extremely complex, and very minor changes like introducing wolves in the Yosemite Park can have impacts on the topography. So on Mars, we have a chance to create like an ecosystem almost from scratch by introducing things little by little. So that will allow us to understand much better how ecosystems evolve. Yeah, and yeah, that's generally.
I think I really like the approach of saying, okay, we have challenges on Earth here that are, and we could, let's say, develop some novel approaches in how to actually deal with these local issues. But I really like this vision of going actually much further and making the let's say the exercise a lot more complicated than it is in reality on our Earth, to actually transpose the problem into a problem on Mars, and then kind of step back to Earth, to say so, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
it's like the 10x approach kind of.
yeah. But what I really love about it is that you might actually come up with solutions that you would have never thought about if you just tried to solve the quote unquote small problems that you have. So I love this approach, and this is, I mean, this is purely like thinking outside the box.
Yeah,
Right.
it's exactly. It's like, for example, there's this very nice story when, let's say, they were designing New York and thinking like, how will New York grow in the future? They thought like, guys, if the population grows at this rate, the manure from all the horses that are gonna travel, all the goods and all the people around are gonna drown the city. And then the car was invented. So no more manure problem. So it's just like, sometimes we just look at very small steps in how we change building things, but sometimes it's really beneficial to take a look at them, like how we can revolutionize things. And it's not easy. It's not, let's say, something that, let's say, we can do on a daily basis, but we should also not only take the safe and easy steps when we are dealing with such big problems.
It reminds me of this very, very famous saying by Henry Ford, that he said he would never have kind of become successful with as a car manufacturer if he had asked what people back then actually wanted, because the reply that he would have gotten was, "We want faster horses." Right. So it's also this thinking outside the outside the box mentality. I love this. There's another quick question from Mike, because we slowly have to wrap things up. We're already a tiny little bit late, but there's one question coming in from Mike, and that is, have you worked a lot with scientists on the Mars project?
Yes, we worked. Let's say the most important scientists we worked with was structural engineers and with experts on plants. Those were our main, let's say, guidelines. And then right now we also use a lot of data that actually NASA has published, because they've been doing a lot of these competitions. So they make public a lot of this information of what is important when you're building on other planets. And actually at BIG, while I was there, we produced a book that explains actually the problematic of each planet and how to build on each planet. And that was fact-checked by a few different scientists, and especially one person from a former employee of SpaceX fact-checked all of our all of our things.
That's quite scientific, I would say.
Yeah.
Awesome. I would say for let's wrap this presentation up here at this point. Sadly, your webcam started or stopped towards the end. I think battery died or something. But
Yes.
let's actually wrap these things up now. So for anybody that has any remaining questions, please hop over to Discord. And it's quite late for Dimitrie, but if you don't get an answer today, you might probably get one over the next couple of days.
I can I'll still be on for about an hour. So
all right.
I'll try to answer within the next half an hour or an hour if there's any questions on Discord.
Nice. You just got another question by Mike.